Welcome to this evening's Melbourne Conversations, titled Democracy Fractures. Can citizens' juries rebuild trust and solve hard problems? We hope so. My name's Rob Gell. It's my pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies and host for this evening. Before we do get underway, may I acknowledge members of the Kulin Nation, the original owners of the land we are meeting on tonight, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. This evening's event has been developed to support the Institute of Public Administration Australia's inaugural Public Sector Week, a week that provides thought-challenging professional development and promotes the role and achievements of the public sector among the broader community. And tonight's event is also supported by future leaders. Councillor Stephen Mayne is a journalist. He established Crikey.com. He's best known as a shareholder activist. At the Melbourne City Council, he continues to be a champion for good governance and was very involved with the People's Panel. Please make Stephen welcome.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Rob. I'd too like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their elders past and present. Also to acknowledge Councillor Rohan Leppert, who is just snuck in the back somewhere over there. Our CEO, Ben Rimmer, and Jeff Taylor and his team and all the staff. Well, welcome everyone. This is close to our 300th Melbourne Conversation. The program started in 2001. It's more exciting than Q&A. So tonight we're aiming to be more dramatic than what happened on Monday night at Q&A. But it's obviously designed to foster debate and community input and community discussion. And we've covered all manner of topics on those 300 nights. So I remember my first one was in 2006 when I got up and was sledging Rupert Murdoch as one of the panellists, and later discovered that his sister was in the audience. So anything can happen at a Melbourne Conversation. Now, City of Melbourne's proud of aiming to be one of Australia's most open and transparent councils. So we're really looking forward to your questions later on tonight. But every committee meeting, the first 2 Tuesdays of the month, we have 15 minutes of completely unscripted public questions at the beginning and the end of the meeting. And we don't get enough people coming along and grilling the councillors. So if you've got a tough question for us tonight, we'll also be expecting to see you on July 7 and July 14, getting stuck into the councillors and the officers with some good, tough questions, because we love debate and conversation and communication at the City of Melbourne. Now, tonight's topic of citizen juries is a very interesting and emerging form of public decision-making. We took the plunge with our 10-year plan, which will be announced and released publicly tomorrow. So a couple of us have got a sneaky copy up here. But it was a unique exercise, and as I'm one of the panellists, I shouldn't be double dipping with the intro, so I think I'll just hand it straight back to our MC, Rob Gell, and I look forward to very much welcoming all of you for your questions when we get to the questions phase towards the back end of the evening. So thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Good. Now to our panel, and you may recognise on your far left the Honourable Anna Burke, MP, Federal Member for Chisholm, and the former Speaker of the House of Representatives. Welcome, Anna. Lovely to have you with us. This side of Stephen, Linda McLeod, who's a People's Panel member, as is Kirsty Carter, who's sitting on my right, and then Nicholas Rees, who's a Public Policy Fellow at the Centre for Public Policy at the University of Melbourne and the author of the academic report on the Melbourne City Council's People's Panel. Please make them welcome. So, we're the world's most livable city. There are a few measures of that sort of thing. The Economist's Intelligence Unit's livability ranking and overview, Melbourne or Australian cities do very well in this, especially Melbourne. In fact, we've been the world's most livable city since 2011 as an ideal destination, but the survey doesn't take into account the cost of living as a factor in livability. There's another measure of livability that comes from the Mercer Quality of Living Survey. That uses New York City as a baseline, gives New York City 100 points, and the list purports to help multinational companies decide where to open offices or plants and how much to pay their employees. Mercer's 2015 survey top 3 are Vienna, Zurich and Auckland. Sydney's at number 10, Melbourne's number 16, and New York City's at number 44. Monocle magazine also does a Most Livable Cities Index. The important criteria in their criteria: safety, crime, international connectivity, climate, sunshine, quality of architecture, public transport, tolerance, environmental issues and access to nature, urban design, business conditions, proactive policy developments and medical care. Melbourne ranks 4th in Monocle's 2015 assessment, Tokyo number 1, Vienna number 2 and Berlin number 3. It's worth noting that depends which one you go with. It's worth noting that the OECD Better Life Index factors in socio-economic comparisons of the livability of cities across the world too. The thing is, we want to retain the title. The Economist's Intelligence Unit's title. It's clearly the best one, it's the one we win. This raises some important questions though. What will that take? How long can we continue to be the champs? Clearly somebody, and I notice the Lord Mayor's not here tonight, somebody thought about using Sepp Blatter's first rule of determining winners and worked out that method's probably going to be way too expensive. So what was needed was a 10-year financial plan. Taking a lead from Luca Belgiorno Nettis's New Democracy Foundation and together with some pretty useful community engagement consultative experience, the City of Melbourne then proposed a people's panel. A representative random sample of 43 citizens, residents, business owners and students, and passed the hard ball to them to determine how we were going to still continue to be number one. A radical experiment in democracy. They proposed a 3-month deliberative process giving citizens access to hitherto restricted information and data and authority, and charged them with the responsibility of reaching a considered set of recommendations to inform the Lord Mayor and councillors on spending priorities for 10 years. Did it work? Has the council abrogated its responsibility? Should other cities do it the City of Melbourne way? We'll find out about that tonight. Stephen, what do you think?
Well, I'm an unabashed fan of the process. I think that with collapsing trust in politicians, my experience with the People's Panel was that they came up with a series of very sensible and well-considered recommendations. And if you get five full Saturdays, beautiful sunny Saturdays that they were, and people put in 50 hours of their time, they will deliver knowledge. They will acquire knowledge that will allow for an informed decision. And if you couple that with random selection, you will genuinely get a spread and diversity of your community. And so I was very impressed with the way the panel was conducted and very impressed with their recommendations, which we are implementing to quite a large degree. And I'm now in the market for new, difficult, intractable problems and topics at which we can throw our citizen experts at to give us very excellent, albeit not binding, advice on decisions that elected pollies should make.
We might come up with a list for you tonight, Stephen. Linda, you're nodding. Is that what happened? You gave up some sunny Saturdays and you came up with some, and it worked?
We sure did. We gave up a lot of sunny Saturdays, actually, a few rainy ones too. But look, this was actually my first experience of being on a citizens' jury, and I found it actually a really exciting process. I mean, we came together with 42 other people, and I was just overwhelmed by how passionate they are about the city that we live in. And it's not every day that you get to implement direct change on the city that you live in, that you work in, and also that you socialise in. So for me, it was just a fantastic experience. I'd like to further the conversation on it and get some other people's opinions as to whether we should perhaps implement this again in the future.
Yeah, I would definitely concur with both, both previous speakers. From my point of view, it was pretty. It was interesting to get the original letter, and I was a bit perplexed as to what it was about. But it was a fantastic opportunity to really have a say in what's going on in this community, and I was really surprised that council was seeking such a direct link between the people who will experience their decisions and the decision makers. So it was terrific. Yeah.
Now, whilst we see how I go, whilst we get your mic fixed, Desley Renton's here. Desley, can you just give us a bit of a heads up? Can we get a microphone to Desley? Because I just want her to let us know how the panellists were selected. There was a process. It's useful for people to know how the 43 were chosen.
We designed a community engagement process that included broad engagement, but a citizens' jury at the centre of it. Citizens' juries are randomly selected when at their best. So to do that, we worked with our property services team, who have very good data in the organisation about who lives who in the city, who owns businesses in the city, and we also worked with the University of Melbourne because we have a very large student population and we needed to get access to students as well. We did seek advice from the New Democracy Foundation throughout this process to ensure that our methodology was robust and aligned with international good practice in this regard. And that then resulted in us sending a letter from the Mayor, as Kirsty has said, a very formal letter as an invitation to approximately 7,000 residents, business owners, students, property owners, inviting them to express interest in participating on the citizens' jury. Now that EOI didn't come back to us directly at the City of Melbourne, it went to the New Democracy Foundation, who undertook the layering and sifting, which resulted in that 43. The purpose for that was so that it was deliberately removed from the city. We needed to be absolutely squeaky clean about who these 43 people resulted to be. They were not people that we tapped on the shoulder. They were not people that were necessarily known to us. They were very clearly randomly selected from a stratified group. So we needed males, females, a variety of ages, a variety of locations across the city. And I think we got something like 500 or 600 expressions of interest from that 6,000 or 7,000, which, you know, the lucky 43, and I think the people who did end up on the panel felt that way. By the time they were selected, it was very much like winning a lottery process.
Excellent. Great.
Hence the commitment. We didn't lose one person over 6 Saturdays.
Okay. Thanks, Leslie. Linda, why did you put your hand up?
Oh, I think my decision to participate was really twofold, from a personal aspect, but also on behalf of my community. I think personally, I wanted to take part in such a novel, innovative opportunity like this, and learn a little bit more about, you know, the inner workings of my council and exactly what the processes of a citizens' jury would be like. I also participated because I wanted to feel actually a bit more connected to my community. And I guess that's why I participated on behalf of my community as well, because I think that a lot of us go through our daily lives and on really quite selfish pursuits a lot of the time, and we can really feel quite disconnected. So this process really made me feel at one again with my community, and that I was actually making a real difference in the lives of my community, and also helping to take back control of some of my city's future that my children are growing up in and thriving in. So
okay, Nick, time for you to give us some background to this. The New Democracy Foundation, the objectives, or I'll give 2 high-level objectives about taking away the impact of vested interests and adversarial politics. But there's a longer history than that you can tell us a little bit about this People's Panel, Citizens' Juries.
Sure. I mean, most people, when they think about democracy and, you know, ancient democracy, you know, they think that it was something that happened in the agora in ancient Athens with, you know, thousands of, you know, citizens voting. In fact, that's not actually how they ran the earliest democracy. It was run using a thing called the Vul, which actually was a group of randomly selected citizens who came together for a short period of time to make decisions about the running of the state. And it proved, certainly for a period of time, to be quite effective. It was stubbornly resistant to corruption because you only served for a limited period. And it was able to bring the common sense of ordinary people, if you like, ordinary citizens, to issues. It also kept with the principle that every citizen is equal. Today, modern political scientists talk about a thing called rational ignorance amongst our citizens. This is the idea that if your voice is just one amongst millions, say in an election, it's not really a productive use of your time to spend getting across the detail of issues. Then on top of that, if you look at the way people sort of consume information about political issues or public policy issues, it tends to be in the form of sound grabs, newspaper headlines, or talking to people who have basically the same views that they do. But if you take a group of randomly selected citizens and you sort of tell them that yes, their decision is going to matter, and you give them the time, really importantly, and the information to get across the issues, you will find that they will come to a perfectly sensible set of recommendations. And I think that has been brilliantly borne out by the Melbourne People's Panel. If you look at the list of recommendations they came up with, they were very, very good. In many respects, braver than some of the recommendations we would get from the politicians.
I'm going to come to Anna in just a minute. Okay, so I've got a quote from H.L. Mencken for you, which you won't agree, but since you've mentioned rational ignorance, he said, "When a candidate for public office faces the voters, he does not face men of sense. He faces a mob of men whose chief distinguishing mark is the fact that they are quite incapable of weighing ideas or even of comprehending any save the most elemental. Men whose whole thinking is done in terms of emotion and whose dominant emotion is dread of what they cannot understand." So you wouldn't agree with that for an instant.
It's funny, when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, online campaigning was a big part of his success. So he had this workshop at the White House, and he called on American citizens to vote on what should be the big issues that they should tackle. And so what were the number one and number two issue that the Neetsons voted for? Number one was decriminalisation of marijuana. And number two was that they should pass a law requiring Barack Obama to produce his birth certificate to prove that he was actually born in America.
So maybe you do agree with Mencken to a degree.
I think it's fair to say that I think online democracy has huge potential, but we haven't quite got there yet.
So Anna, I'm looking, Anna's down the end of the panel, just sort of nodding and thinking about her own
Trying to stay awake,
experience.
actually, I'll be honest.
She's had a couple of hard days. She's been working very hard. So Anna, could this process valuably work in the federal sphere? Do you think, would Joe Hockey appreciate the people's advice on his budget?
Well, probably if he'd taken it to people before he gave it, maybe he'd got his budget through. So there probably is some lessons to be learnt. But I noticed one of my councillors, Bill Bennett, from the City of Whitehorse, has come along tonight. So maybe we're going to be trialling it out in my neck of the woods. So that's a good sign. So welcome to Bill.
We won't hold our breath on that one.
We won't hold our breath on that one. But I think going to some quotes, I think if you look at Churchill, which I think is the one we all go to, and I've got it so I get it right so nobody tells me off, okay? It has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all others that have been tried. He also said the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. So you've got to weigh those two up. And I think what we've seen here, in more than taking that cynical view, is that this was not an uninformed conversation. So we're looking at a panel of individuals who've come along and had an informed conversation. So I think that's what's at the heart of this, and we can explore that. A bit of participation for the audience. I've done this before, so don't answer, Bill. What do you think the number one issue people have written to me about in the last 5 years as a federal member of parliament? Number one issue people have written to me. No, not push bikes off parliament. I'm a federal member. Just quick.
Gay marriage.
No, not gay marriage. Not asylum seekers. Not the economy. Not misogyny, not income tax. Live animal exports. Live animal exports. More people write to me about cows and sheep than anything else. Live animal exports would be the number one issue that people, and not just me, but most federal members of parliament. So if you think about how to engage with the public and what do you do, the question I leave you with is, do politicians lead or follow? So if we can do some of these things that is an informed debate, I think Mr Hockey's budget would be in a lot better position than it is now.
Okay, can you give us an example, perhaps before we finish, of something that you think we might, just to tease the audience a bit about what we might apply, whether it's live animal exports or something that might be interesting to think about. Let's just check that. I might make sure Kirsty's microphone's working.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah. Good.
Good.
Butt in whenever you like then.
Okay. Well, I could butt in now, actually.
Yeah, go ahead if you wish.
I think there was just an issue that's raised by Nick and Anna around this process being informed, and it's certainly one of the challenges that the panel had in making decisions about matters that we really didn't, we weren't across at the start of the process. So, for example, we didn't know much about building roads, we didn't know much about the trees, we didn't know much about a lot of these things, and the panel process was really well done. We had various, there were various ways of presenting that information to us, and we were able to guide exactly who presented the information to us, what kind of information we had, and from that, in that 6 weeks, we were able to make decisions about these very complex issues that we had very little information on to start with. So,
did you have enough time?
I think that's sort of, that's kind of a difficult question, because some of these issues we could have debated for several years, I think, and have been debated for several years in other forums. From our
So how did you come to resolutions on the hard things?
Well, I would actually disagree with Kirsty to some extent. I don't think that we had enough time. We had 6 Saturdays altogether, and I'd say about 3 of them was actually taken up just mining all the information that we needed. So we had to then synthesise that information, construct it into some sort of, I guess, intelligible sort of recommendations or set of recommendations. Then we actually had to write the report, so we were very time sparse. And I think that by the end of the 6 Saturdays, a lot of the panel members were starting to feel a bit rushed, and perhaps when we were voting on each of the recommendations, we had a can we live with it kind of threshold. I think that some people probably found they were living with a whole lot more than what they usually could come to terms with, just because it was such a tight time period. So that would be one of my criticisms of the process.
Did you make comments about that, Nick, in your report?
We surveyed participants in this process about their political attitudes at the beginning and at the end. I mean, one of the big problems, I think probably most people here, there's a palpable sense that something's not really working the way it should in our democracy. At the moment, it's getting harder and harder for governments to get good and necessary things done. And one of the things that is missing in the system at the moment is trust. And so we were particularly interested to look at how people's attitudes toward the system changed. So, and I've got to say the results were really positive. So, we asked people at the end, do you think there's a greater role for people to have input into public policy decision making? 100% of the participants came back and said yes. As a political scientist, you don't see 100% response rate very often. So that was quite encouraging to see. Also, we asked this question, do you think ordinary citizens are capable of having input into policy? That went up. There was a political dividend as well for the politicians. So when we asked them, do you have trust and confidence in Melbourne City Council, that particular measure went up quite significantly as a result of spending time actually learning about what the council does and the issues that it's dealing with.
So Stephen and the Lord Mayor stakes have gone up, haven't they?
Well, it's interesting. That's the best way to get politicians on board this train, because traditionally we're power addicts who don't want to let go. But in Sydney, Canada Bay did a people's panel, and the only Labor mayor in the whole of New South Wales whose vote went up in the last election when Labor was on the nose was the mayor of Canada Bay after doing one of these. So the community likes politicians who actually trust their community and show they're serious in getting informed advice. But if you ignore it, you'll be flogged. So hence the adherence. You have to really put some decision making out there and say, this is on the line, we will follow your advice. Not all of it, but we will meaningfully follow it. And I think that's the key to actually the model working.
And I really felt, from my point of view, I really felt there was a mutuality to this. So I was getting to know the process of decision making in Melbourne City Council, the people who were making the decisions, and they were getting to know me and other people on the panel, and therefore the community too. So it was a very, I think that's, as I understand it, what deliberative democracy is all about, having this two-way conversation instead of just a presentation from an interest group to, the decision makers. So it was very effective, and it certainly built trust for me. So
there's a second political dividend as well that I think is worth touching on. So the first one is that if once citizens have gone through this process, they have more trust and believe that the council is more efficient than they thought previously. The second political dividend is that it provides political cover for politicians to do things that they otherwise might not have the courage to do. So tomorrow you're releasing the financial plan. I don't know how much about that you want to say now, but I'm sure that in selling or explaining...
Well, it's only us here,
we can... and the cameras.
And the camera.
I'm sure that in selling and explaining some of those initiatives, you will say, well, when we asked an ordinary group of everyday Melburnians about these initiatives, they supported this. So
I'll give you two examples where it's probably already happened. We got the rate rise up to 3.6% this year, and the officer recommendation was only 3%, and that little extra 1.5 million was strengthened and resisted less. We've got a low tax Lord Mayor. Was resisted less because the People's Panel had said 30% real increase over 10 years. And equally, the panel told us to hock into the developers for more developer contributions to come to council, because we're undercooking it compared to Sydney and Brisbane. And we had very little resistance to a doubling of our open space revenues from 10 million to 20 million, which was a meaningful slug on the developers. Very little resistance, unanimous support, and no one really took it on, helped by the mandate from the panel telling us we're undercooked and we need to move down this path. So it's already having quite an influence as we make decisions each month.
And I picked up a couple of other things. So the recommendations, and this is not all of them, some of them, increased revenue, plus 2.5% rate rise based on above CPI. Increased developer contributions, as Stephen's mentioned. Sale of non-core assets, which you might make a comment about, Stephen, in a moment. There's one particular one that is contrary to your own personal view. A prudent increase in debt finance to fund city infrastructure. Then, in terms of reduced costs, not in favour of the redevelopment of the Queen Victoria Market, and a 1% compounding efficiency dividend. Spending, maintain the level of spending on community services. Increased spending on climate change, bicycle lanes, increased footpath widths. And just as a couple of headlines. So, do you want to mention the sale of assets thing? Because it's particularly in your space.
Well, I, as Chair of Finance, I went in there and tried to get a mandate from the panel to sell Citywide, which is our services outsourced, it's independently managed, but we own 100% of it. It's a big business, 1,200 staff, 240 million a year of revenues. We do 400 million. So it's a very, very big part of our operation. And the panel, I went to lobby them all directly in our little sessions, and they came straight back and just said, don't sell it, keep it. And as the chief advocate, who was probably going to struggle with the numbers anyway, and felt the only way I would ever get the numbers on this would be through the mandate of a panel, I instantly dropped it and just said, the community has said no, even when they've only heard the sell it argument. No one else came in with a particularly strong, this is fantastic, we've got to keep it. And so I've dropped it, and the 10-year plan has dividends from Citywide until 2023.
So Anna, do you think Kevin might have got the CPRS up if he'd thought about something like this?
Well, I think the difficulty at a federal and state level, leave aside councils, how you do it, and what is the issue and how you'd actually go and do it. You asked 7,000 people, 4,000, 40 came along and did it. How would you do this Australia-wide, and how would you actually interact it? I'm not going to poo-poo it, but actually just thinking about the actual mechanics of making it work. I often say to audiences in Melbourne, some of you I know have met me at forums on asylum seekers, yes, but we're from Melbourne. I'm a federal politician, and not everybody's view Australia-wide reflects that. So to ensure we've actually got a genuine conversation, you then have to work out, you're in Tassie, you're in WA, you're in, Christmas, Norfolk Island, you're everywhere, you're going to Maningrida. How do you physically do that to bring those people along? Do you do it via, as you say, online surveys? Again, in some of our parts of Australia, you actually physically can't do that. You're not connected. It's one of the reasons we've never gone to electronic voting, because physically in Indigenous communities, we would actually be disenfranchising a whole lot of people to vote. So I think there's some merit in it, but you'd have to drill it down to how you do it. My seat, which is, it's 150 lower house seats, I've got 100,000 voters. So how do I even interact with 100,000 voters? And people say to me, controversial issue, and let's not take up the night with that, but marriage equality. Whose conscience am I exercising? Mine? My voters? Do my voters have a single conscience? Do they have a shared view? Do they have a similar view? No. So how do you capture and engage that? Particularly around something as important as action on climate change and an action we can all live with.
And why did that?
Look at the last referendum we had. As I said, Stephen knows the answer to this. How many referendum have we had in Australia? 44. How many have got up?
None.
8.
Oh, 8.
8. So think about Australia and doing that and getting a consensus view. But as I said, it's not about actually, because it's about recommendations. So it's not even doing something as radical as changing the constitution, but giving an informed view to the policymakers. Because most of our informed view comes from bureaucrats.
Why did Julia's attempted panel blow up so disastrously? It was the best known sort of setback for the model was the climate change just before the election. I'm going to go to a panel to make my decision. Why did that? I mean, was that because you were perceived to be wimping the decision and kicking it down the road?
I think so. I think given the context of where it was just too out there and too difficult, plus which we'd just come back into minority government to get the Greens on side. We'd already done a deal. So you'd be disingenuous. We've actually already just signed something to say that's what we're doing with the Greens party to get into government, to form government, and then say, oh, well, no, actually we're going to ditch you, even though we've got a signed deal, and go and talk to the citizens. So I don't think you can run this an election period. No. You have to run this when you're in government. Otherwise, you are manipulating the election process, and I think that's bad.
Can I ask you a question of both of you? I'm really interested to know what the general feeling is, both in Melbourne City Council and at a federal level, for this sort of process. Is this something that politicians are generally on board with, or are there people very opposed to it? Or?
My experience is that there's a fair bit of residual innate opposition amongst the elected reps. Media will often bag it. I'm looking for new challenging issues. I've said I reckon the enterprise agreement would be an interesting one, never been tried before in Australia. Others at council talked about density of development would be a good intractable decision to go with. So I'm in the market for a new one, but I didn't get the numbers last week to put it in the plan for next year. But I might go with a motion in the next 4 to 6 weeks to try and test the numbers publicly, because we've had a successful model. So if we've got a good precedent, I think I would flush out the dissenters by actually forcing them to vote against it in public.
So do you think this process has changed council's view, so the people who weren't in support of this sort of thing are now in support?
Well, the LM wasn't happy with the rate rise. The Lord Mayor wasn't happy with the 30% real rate rise as a low tax guy, and that's fair enough. And his argument was, and this was the controversial bit, was it flushed out new detail, new information. So the officers came through and said there's a $900 million backlog, unfunded infrastructure backlog. And Lorma actually said to the panel, you've been snowed by the officers. So, it was pretty lively stuff when you got the Lord Mayor contradicting and taking on the officers on the question of how big is the backlog. But I think it's had a lot of success, and I think that push comes to shove, there will be more support at council, but what is the topic? Topic selection is key. And people won't want to take risks with topics that are dear to their heart, because they hate the idea of being told to do something that they already absolutely don't want to do.
Isn't that the point, though? Yeah. That's the point of this.
Yes.
So it is interesting looking around the world to see what is happening in this space. So, Australia's not alone with this kind of government dysfunction, palpable sense something's not working in our democracy. So other places in the world are experimenting. So interestingly, in Oregon, where they have citizen-based referenda, and politicians were worried that wealthy interests were manipulating this process to kind of get some crazy kind of outcomes. They now require that anything that's going to go before a referendum firstly has to go before a citizen jury, and then the report of the citizen jury is provided to all citizens before they vote in the referendum. So going to your question about we've had 44 referendums, only 8 have ever succeeded. Quite frankly, more than 8 should have succeeded, but the nature of public debate wasn't. Imagine if you went to a citizen jury first, so before you voted, well, what did everyday people like me, when they had the time and the information to go through this, what conclusion did they come to? In the UK last week, a major think tank has come out with the radical proposal that the House of Lords, most undemocratic institution in the world, should actually be replaced by a People's Assembly, a group of citizens randomly selected to serve a period of time to review bills going before the lower house. Importantly, they can't amend legislation, but they can stop it. So, interesting. Now, if you're going to take that to Australia, I think, there's this power paradox where anyone with power doesn't want to give it up. So no parliament in Australia is going to say, that I can see anytime soon, we're going to get rid of our Senate or upper house, but they might agree to a third chamber. They might say, okay, let's have a citizens' assembly for 6 months, and the 3 most controversial things coming before this parliament next 6 months, let's see what the third chamber says about it. That would produce some interesting results.
Got out of thinking now.
Look, in Switzerland now, every major legislative change has to go to a referendum. Think about it, every major legislative change, because of their federation, their cooperation, the fact that they never have a majority government. We are hung up on majority governments in this country, apart from anything else, a majority in most places. Councils are better at that because they're not a majority and it's not major parties. It's actual cooperation of, how many ex-councillors sitting around a table. And a lot of it's informed by the capability of those councillors and the advice from the officers. So it's a very different model, and that's what we've got. We've got so many models of governance in this country. But going back to the point, the original question, would people want it? People give lip service to engaging with community, Parliament for the people, by the people, outreach. We actually do a lot of cooperation work that you don't see. We have, all the committees that run within the Parliament. Most really good committees will actually go out to the community and consult. But generally they're only consulting the people interested in that idea. So it's not getting a whole lot of random individuals, giving them some information and asking for a result. So yeah, could we try it? Probably we should. Will it happen anytime soon? No, it won't.
Do you think it needs further testing at the local government level first?
A few more examples.
Further support?
Yeah, I think further examples of where it works. And it doesn't even need to be within a political setting or a local council. I've seen it work in voluntary organisations where the power is held with a couple of individuals who want to be president, and they've gone, no, actually we want to consult with the wider grouping. So, school governance boards. Again, the large schools all have a board that run that, and it's usually, a couple of parents who are involved or ex-parents. But when you actually go out to the broader community in the school and ask them, you'll often find there's some other individuals. But if you just put out a survey, I do this quite regularly to my electorate, less than 20% will respond, and that's a good response rate. So if I just ask for you to give me feedback, you generally don't. So City of Melbourne, have you done an electorate-wide survey of residents? Would you know?
Not
Would we
recently,
know?
no.
We've done one? Not recently. So we take that as consultation and information and doing that, but it's not. This is a totally different thing. So a lot of people will give lip service to it, but to actually do it in this way, in a tested environment, I don't see it happening anytime soon, because again, people don't want to give up power.
We only had 10% response, and it was like a royal wedding invitation. I mean, it was beautiful. But it flushed out the interested factor, so we got 650 interested people, and from that we got a good quality of panellists because we removed all the disinterested types.
Well, who knows, Anna? Maybe the new Andrews government in Victoria might do something in this space. The state to watch.
You know some of them well, so you could work on that.
The state to watch is South Australia.
Yeah.
So Jay Weatherill, Premier of South Australia, has run a citizens jury to look at the issue of liquor licensing. Vexed issue. When can you? What hours should they operate, and so on. He's also run a citizen jury to look at bicycles and cars sharing the road and the trade-offs involved there. And I think there might be something big coming down the pipe. Let's wait and see. Of course, students of history will know that South Australia has got quite a pioneering past for democratic innovation. Of course, South Australia was one of the first, I think the second jurisdiction in the world to give women the vote, and the first jurisdiction in the world in which women could actually run for Parliament. There.
You're not going to share Jay's next one with us, but there's only us here.
Is it nuclear?
Nuclear
would be a good one.
power station?
Well, I'm just saying, watch this space.
Very brave minister.
Especially with the National Conference coming up, but let's not go there.
Yeah. Just for our panellists as well. So has your impression or your perception of City of Melbourne changed?
It sure has. I think that throughout the process, I was so impressed by how much effort and work they were doing for us. So much planning went into this process, and it really showed us that they were serious. They wanted to know our opinions, and they were going to take our recommendations really seriously as well. So that engendered a lot of trust from the panel members.
Why did you believe that? I know you had the first two sessions were like information sessions to understand what you were going to be discussing. Why did you believe at some stage that you were getting the right information, you're getting the truth, and that you were being empowered to do your job?
I guess because we were given information that sometimes sounded like people pushing their own agenda, but we were given, not naming anyone in particular, but we were given the freedom to properly evaluate their arguments and given the space to be able to come to our own conclusions. And many times we decided that we weren't going to accept their arguments, and that was fine. We were given the space to do that.
Expert selection too. They could choose the experts
We
to
could.
hear from, and
Yep.
I wasn't called back.
Yep.
Others more credible, other more credible people were.
True.
Would you agree,
Yeah.
Kirsten?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I really appreciated some of the more forthright, members of council, and Stephen was one of those, and the mayor also had some very, clear views, and I really appreciated that. The fact was that we were able to ask any question that we wanted to ask, and we got answers to it.
Yeah.
So, whether the actual information that we were given is, was correct or not is, of course, we can't possibly know that. But we certainly felt that they were very responsive and were as committed to this process as we were. So it was very good.
Yeah, okay. Now we'll continue our conversation, but if you'd have a question that you'd like to flag, we'll certainly start taking some of those. The gentleman, I'm going to...
Can I just ask one of the panellists? I'd be fascinated to know, when you were going through your deliberations, the door was closed, everyone was out of the room. How did you deal with the nutters, the people who just wouldn't let go on a particular issue, or had to be in their bonnet about something and wouldn't kind of move with the group? There must have been some of that in the room.
There was. I think we both agree on that. I think that it came down to the facilitation process, and the facilitators were actually really exceptional. Right from the word go, they made it very clear to us what our remit was going to be, and they made sure that we stuck to that constantly throughout the 6 Saturdays. And they also constantly reminded us of what values that the panel themselves had put in place for standards of behaviour.
Yes.
So that really engendered respect amongst all the panel members throughout our deliberations. So it was really the expert facilitation that allowed such diverse opinions and people from such diverse backgrounds to come together and respectfully debate on these very difficult concepts.
I think you've been very polite, Linda, but you didn't particularly answer Nick's question. The facilitators managed that problem? Is that what you're saying?
I believe they did.
Yeah.
I believe they did.
Was there any points of disagreement you thought you would never get past or never be able to resolve?
Well, there was some fairly tight and fairly sort of, I guess, people who had some particular views that they wanted to manage, but the process that the facilitators put in place to give us, kind of a benchmark about whether it was or wasn't accepted, so 80%, acceptance, and can we live with it, those sort of standards allowed us to come to those decisions. I do think too that the process allowed certain natural talents in the room to come to the fore. So there were some people who just were naturally talented at managing information and managing groups. So I noticed particularly in one group, one of our panel colleagues was chairing a small group because there were different formats for coming to issues, so coming to decisions. One of them was small group activities, and this particular person just really managed all the people in the group very well. There was a person there who had a particular issue that she was pushing and didn't seem to be able to get onto anything else, and he just managed that really well. And the facilitators setting up a system or a process whereby a chair of each small group was appointed and, was part of that process. So, yeah, it was just terrific.
And also in our final report, there were still some people, even at that final stage when we were voting on all our recommendations, that still had their been in their bonnet about a certain issue. So we actually allowed for minority reports to be included within our main report to, I guess, keep the peace at the end of the day, but not have them as prominent recommendations.
I've just thought to ask, why 43? Is that the number for the meaning of life or something like that? Why 43?
42.
42 was. So, hang on, there's something weird there. Does it help?
There is a statistical formula.
Okay.
The size of the City of Melbourne.
That's the number.
And it was
That's
basically
the critical
that
number.
the fear is that the drop-off will see you lose a few, and 30 is considered the base number. So you have to start with a number and think about the absolute lowest you can finish with, and 30 was the figure, and we didn't lose a single one.
My concern is what's the difference between a people's panel and a focus group? And more importantly, the greatest flaw I find with this process is that it represents the small borough of the City of Melbourne, not the greater Melbourne. I believe we need to embrace the broader Melbourne community in order to make decisions related to our capital, not just the interest groups within the city itself or the centre of the city.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because we only base it on our rate people, residents and business, and 600,000 or 700,000 are coming into the city every day. So I did ask the question. We've had a bit of an anti-car flavour in the recommendations. Is that partly because we didn't actually put anyone on there who drove in their car to work to the city? And that possibly was the case. As for focus groups, the deep dive is the difference. Is that it's 50 hours and putting the sugar on the table of a live decision to be taken. Focus groups are not doing that. They're just sourcing opinions in a less deep manner.
And I think a focus group is all about doing gathering the views of people, but it's not about having a discussion. And the great thing about this is it was very much an interactive discussion between us and the experts, and internally between ourselves. And that's not usually part of a focus group, I don't think. So.
My question is to the lower house member. Sorry,
Anna.
What you said that in the Senate they go to committees a lot. Would a committee maybe call a jury together?
Both houses have committees. You see more information about committee structure in the Senate because of legislative committees, but we have hundreds of committees that are standing committees and joint and special committees. So they go and they do a lot. But I could imagine that you could have on a specific issue a committee that would then institute a panel, a citizens jury panel around an issue. One of the committees I was involved in, interesting enough, was about cost shifting onto local government. Okay, we actually went for 3 years around the country. We spoke to every local government going. We then asked the question, actually, what does local government do? Don't ask that question because you actually can't quantify it, and you can't quantify it even within Victoria, let alone comparative around the country. So we went literally everywhere. We kept getting in smaller and smaller planes, and I kept landing on smaller and smaller airstrips. That didn't look like airstrips anymore. And we did this genuinely to hear, but we were hearing from the people who came. So this is a very different process. This is getting people together who might have an interest in this area, but asking them for their expertise. So I think you could actually trial this very much through one of those committee processes and get some really good results.
Well, the two options are committees and ministers. So in WA, Alana McTiernan, the Minister, Planning and Transport, pioneered it more than any other politician in Australia. Multiple panels on multiple issues. But I agree, the committees are unique federally, and that's an excellent suggestion.
This current exercise has been run fairly successfully by one particular government organisation. Do you think the approach can be used to weld the organs of government together and help them tackle issues beyond the political term?
So between governments, we're talking about how do we do this?
Yeah, look, the experience of citizen juries is that they tend to work best when there is a trade-off question involved. So, Anna, I was thinking earlier about your point about marriage equality, which is a sort of yes/no type question. And I'd probably like to think about this more deeply, but I'm not sure that would be, for example, the best sort of question to put to a citizen jury. Better sort of issues are ones like what tax rates should we have, or what general level of service do we want? You know, if you ask ordinary people what do they want, they'll say we want lower taxes and better services. You say, well, actually, it doesn't quite work like that. But if you give them the time, the information, they can actually work through those trade-offs. So, you know, I spoke before about South Australia. You know, sharing of the roads, liquor licensing laws, those sort of things work well. Maybe if you put before a citizen jury which level of government is the best to look after particular types of government services, and you gave people a couple of days to work it through, I think you'd probably get some quite interesting results. So yeah, that would be one possibility.
There'd be something that, you know, an issue that falls across all levels of government, something like the second airport in Sydney, so that you've got this conflict between state, local, federal, who's paying, where's it going, who's it impacting. So there's a decision that you needed, that the issue's been where, how. So you could have probably placed that question. A lot of the Lana's questions were around those sort of very, you know, it wasn't a yes/no answer. It was where, how, and what do we do, or do we do it? Do we actually have the second airport, or don't we? Should we have built the train? So you could, because I mean, one of the big issues is the overlap and the interplay. And as I said, the other thing is cost shifting. It's huge. It goes on all the time.
I'm just thinking, I've just come from a meeting that I sit on the Victorian Coastal Council. The City of Taree in New South Wales, the Environment Minister, Rob Stokes, who's an environmental lawyer, rescinded a vote to spend $56 million on a seawall to protect 6 houses and a funny little timeshare resort. I'm thinking about the sort of things we're discussing on the Coastal Council, about how do we manage coastlines in a time of climate change, about whether we stick things higher up in the air, move them back from the coast further, and all the decision making around that. This is ideally suited for some questions like that. Question here.
Fran Maloney. I would like to ask a question, and maybe of the staff at the City of Melbourne. What processes they use to engage people from a diverse background, people who have English as a second language? How did you ensure that they were engaged in the process?
Okay.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Well, we referred to the 10-year financial plan engagement process as something of a funnel, with the citizens jury right at the very tip of that, and we undertook a broader engagement process as well. So we held discussion groups and workshops with our Indigenous communities. We invited through our networks, our residents associations, our business precinct groups to meetings so that we made sure that we were able to capture their voices as well. In addition to that, we held a number of pop-up events around the city because we were very conscious that we needed to talk to young people and families and harder to reach groups, if you like. So we set up shop in places like the Flemington Community Housing Estate, and were able to capture voices through those sessions. We also had an online focus on Participate Melbourne with a tool that we created for this project in the form of a budget simulator. So you as a community member actually had an annual budget of $4 million, like $400 million to spend. And you could increase spending on community services, for example, but if you did that, you'd see the budget going into the red, and then you had to balance it somehow. So all of that data came back to us in the form of reports, which we then forwarded on to the People's Panel, in the aim of them hearing the broader voices of the community as part of their deliberative process.
Happy with that?
So if you go to the History Museum in ancient Athens. In Athens today, one of the corners of the museum, they've got this device. I'm not going to get it right. It's called a clarion, I think, and it's basically like a Powerball machine that they built 2,500 years ago. And if your number came out of this machine, then you were on the Vul, which was the citizen jury of ancient Athens. Of course, today we have stratified random sampling and modern mathematical techniques which allow us to use a weighted sample of the electorate, which is selected randomly but nonetheless is weighted such that it represents the broader community. So it's a really clever technique.
Gentleman here.
I think my question's mainly been
Just let us know who you are.
My name's Shane Delphine. I think my question's mainly been answered. It is about the self-selection in the process itself. It does seem somewhat problematic. You're not getting probably. I think you've kind of answered that in the sense you're not getting these different lower socioeconomic groups being represented in the.
Did.
Yeah,
I believe we did. I believe we did.
People from those groups maybe, but
Yep.
it does seem to me, or perhaps people with intellectual disabilities, or other people with other, I don't know how that's addressed in these broader.
So you can weight your sample. So for example, if I'm not going to get the weightings right, but if you know that 30% of the City of Melbourne is made up of voters who are businesses, then you can weight the sample such that 30% of the members on your citizen jury are businesses. If you know the various areas of the city, you can weight the sample such that you get a person from each of the different parts of the city. So you weight it in that way. Now it'll never be perfect, but it's a really clever way of getting a snapshot of the group. And I know one councillor did walk in and made some disparaging comments about the jury when he first saw it, and we were able to say, no, this is as close as you can get to a snapshot.
We do have a lot of international students, was the answer.
Yes, that was the...
Yeah. And there was certainly, sorry, just one more comment on that.
I want to hear from you, Linda, on that.
Well, do you want to go? Or, well,
no, go ahead.
Yeah, you can.
Well, I was just going to say, I didn't get to speak to everybody on the panel, but I was certainly aware that there were people there from different socio-economic backgrounds. So, for example, there was a lady who was living in public housing, and then we had barristers and architects and lawyers. So there was definitely some, some difference in people's backgrounds there. Yeah.
Yeah, and there were a lot of international students because that's just a fact of the City of Melbourne. We're made up of a huge number of international students. I live in the City of Melbourne, I work in the City of Melbourne, and I'm also a student in the City of Melbourne, so I tick a number of different boxes. So I don't know where you, place those people that do tick a number of different roles, in the City of Melbourne. But it was actually interesting. In our first session, we played a lot of sort of get-to-know-you games, and we had to divide out into the areas of the City of Melbourne that we came from. And we found that was actually really quite well balanced. We had representatives from a lot of the different, suburbs within the City of Melbourne, and we had about a 50-50 split, I think, between the commercial sector and the residents in the City of Melbourne as well. So I think most of the panel members were quite reassured throughout the process that there was a very good balance and a good representation of what our community is made up of.
And if I understand the process properly, and you might want to comment on this, Nick, to select a particular group of people, so people with disabilities or people, who live in public housing, or people who, use whatever service, is actually going back to the notion of interest groups, which is what we're trying to get away from, I think. So.
Yeah, look, you can't wait for every particular socio-economic category or set of human circumstances. So, and Desley, you might want to add to this if you want, but we chose key things that most people would think helps define people in a particular area. This was no ordinary jury down at the Supreme Court hearing a murder trial. Quite a lot of thinking went into just getting the weightings right so that we had a
some thinking goes into murder trials.
And of the 650 acceptances that came in, I think it skewed older male finance guys, because we did a 50% business, and we were saying it was a 10-year financial plan.
Yep.
So a lot of the accountants and financey people said, yep, that's my topic, I'm in for it. And then not many of them successfully got on the panel because we were looking for that diversity, but they were well represented. It did skew 60-40 male. That was probably one of the biggest differences because of that business male element.
I think that was evident to a lot of the panel members as well, that the loudest voices which had that kind of financial background or business background were the men. Yeah, that was evident.
Let's take a question here.
Yeah. How would something like a people's panel work with an issue like asylum seekers? Given that, like you've talked about, having an informed discussion, would a government, maybe this is, I can answer the question myself, would there ever be a place in time when a government would actually allow a people's panel to make some informed decisions around future policy for asylum seekers, because it's not going to go away? Would the government ever be brave enough to do that and then accept the recommendations given the political oomph that refugees and asylum seekers continue to hold?
Without becoming too political about one issue, but looking at it from an actual viewpoint of informed debate, the problem is we're not having a formed debate about this issue. We don't have a formed debate about lots of issues because, again, where are you getting your information from? Where do you actually interact and get information from? And I think this is one of the really interesting things about this discussion. 14 to 29-year-olds don't watch free-to-air TV, so they're not getting it off the news. They might listen to radio, but they're probably listening to podcasts, they're probably listening to YouTube, they're probably listening to other sources of information. 29 to 40-year-olds might engage with free-to-air TV, they're probably not reading newspapers anymore. So when we talk about the influence of the newspapers and informed debate, it's actually very low, very, very low. Then the older age group will interact a bit with everything. But you are self-selecting the information you're interacting with, because you're self-selecting around your own prejudice. So today I've had a myriad of emails from very well-informed people in this debate, but they're out there looking for it. They go, well, why don't other people see this? Well, because their daily lives means that, you know, it's not front of mind, they're not engaged with it. So yeah, probably to get better legislative policy outcome, if you actually had something that was an informed debate about the actual numbers, what's actually happening, how, you know, expert advice about how to resolve situations and do it. They're actually exploring this in Italy as we speak, because we don't have a crisis, they do. How do you do that? And I think that would be highly intelligent. But again, I go back to where I started. Would we do that anytime soon? No, because this is a political issue.
I think it would work.
And so being despondent, and sorry, this is me coming back from a week in Canberra. Literally off the plane as we got here. It wouldn't happen now, but could it happen? Yes. And then again, looking at where you came from, arriving, being given information, coming in with your information, and then looking at it, would you arrive somewhere else? I hope you would. I'm not sure you would, because do you come to anything value free? No, you don't. So, but is information power? Yes, it is.
I think you could do one on size of asylum seeker or refugee intake as a proportion of overall immigration program. I think you get quite a sensible advice on that. I wouldn't go near border protection tactics. I think it's just too fraught. But I think yeah, you could do it on that other element.
Question, gentleman here.
My name's Michael Green. I actually wrote an article about it, People's Panel for the Age, and I watched the whole, well, as much of it as I was allowed to see. And it was very impressive, and everyone who I interviewed at length sort of throughout the process were really won over by it, and it was quite inspiring. I do have some kind of questions about the specifics of the process, and if we are to do this more often, I think these are things we need to look at quite carefully. And one thing was that no one could actually see the deliberation. And this seems to be standard practice for the New Democracy Foundation, which is that the panellists get to close out the room with the time they're debating. And in some ways that's quite disappointing, because that deliberation is sort of the promise of the whole thing, and I just don't know how it went. Were there people who won over the group? I mean, I'm just interested, and I wasn't sure whether it was sort of a reflex thing where the people in the group felt, oh, we need to protect ourselves. And I was interested in Linda and Kirsty's reflections afterwards on whether that was necessary, or if it was, why it was, and then perhaps if some of the other...
Let's just hold that. Let me first ask Nick what the ancient Greeks did.
I believe that the Vul, the public could turn up and actually watch.
Okay.
So the New Democracy Foundation doing fantastic work in Australia. Luca Bongiorno-Nettis is a very wealthy industrialist. I think he got sick of politicians asking him for money all the time. He said, we don't need better politicians, we need a better system. And so he's kind of been supporting these experiments, and I think they're developing their processes as they go along. And I think, and Desley, I'd be interested for you to add to this, but I believe the thinking is that they want to protect the jury members and allow them to be able to talk openly, not feel that they have to hold things back, and that occurs better if it's sort of behind closed doors with the facilitators. Now, that's not how they did it in ancient Greece, but this is very much a learning journey that we're on.
Michael, as a journalist, trust in the press is not high.
Was that something you discussed?
We voted on that, and so that was the majority vote that we wouldn't. Personally, from my point of view, I was a bit of a fence sitter. I thought that the process should be open. If it was open, it was open, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be sort of limiting parts of it. Although I did have some kind of reservations about the process being new to us and what that might look like. So we didn't actually know where things were going to go. And so it's like we're exposing ourselves as individuals to something that we weren't even kind of really sure about where it was going to go. So that may have driven people's decision making around that. And Linda might want to comment on that.
I think so. I think first of all that we did actually allow the room to be opened up at times. So it wasn't completely shut for the full 6 Saturdays. We did have some periods where we opened up the room. And I think Kirsty's right, that I think we all felt a little bit protective of just that very vulnerable situation that we were in to start with, kind of trying to kind of tread water in that sea of sort of information that we were just overwhelmed with to start with. And I think that perhaps some of us felt that it might be reported as being a really unprofessional process when we were all just trying to gather our thoughts and we didn't quite know where we stood to start with. I think as the process went on, it became much more structured and much more ordered for us, and I think we all were able to realise that common goal that we'd come together to achieve. So I think that perhaps if this process was repeated again, that perhaps opening up the room sort of further down the process might be quite beneficial. I also think, just from talking to a few of the panel members, that perhaps some of the professionals that were there, perhaps they were a little bit wary of some of their professional affiliations or associations with certain, bodies or organisations that might not have been happy with them, just freely airing their views. I think that people do have to consider their professional affiliations as well, that even though we all came together as individuals, people were aware of what each other did as sort of a profession and what their background was. I think some people might have felt they were just more, they were able to speak more freely without the spotlight of the media on them.
Yeah, and people are not going to bag my obsession about selling citywide if I'm watching.
Yep.
So it's much more free-flowing if people can speak without any form of intimidation or worry about what third parties are going to, how they're going to respond to comments made.
Or is it theatre? I mean, as soon as they started live broadcast of question time, the dynamics of it changed overnight.
Debate at council is much shorter in confidential items than in public items, because we all know the audio is there and the public are watching. So the element of theatre is absolutely relevant in these things.
At the back here first, and the gentleman with the red and white top. Go ahead.
Mike Clark from from a new councillor from Yarra Ranges. Just to say briefly, I'm running monthly forums with what I call the leaders of my ward and getting extremely good feedback and good two-way conversations. It cost me about $50, $60 to host that. I'm just wondering what the cost of this panel would be and the total cost, and if panellists themselves are paid for their time. Thank you.
I think you know those answers, don't you, Stephen?
It was about 150,000, I think, and there's probably not, the whole thing. I think there's a lot of officer time as well, which is probably not maybe accounted for in that. But it was 150 spending, and then the panellists were well under the award. They got $500.
$500 for 6 Saturdays.
$100. It was meant to be 5 Saturdays. They gave us a bonus Saturday for free, so we worked it very hard.
Yep.
Are there any examples where it's gone wrong in other citizen panels where mistakes have been made and things can be learnt for future panels? Any epic fails out there of this sort of process?
I think Alana McTiernan got the location of something controversial which she couldn't accept. I'm not sure what the facility was, but it was in the city or out, and she just said, I can't do it. So that was probably the best example of something that's completely rejected. And there was one that blew up, I'm not sure where it was, but the panellists could sense that the fix was in, the decision was already made, and you're just seeking validation for something you've already made because the time frame set was too short. And there was a big riot from the panellists and the whole thing sort of fell over. So you have to give enough time, and the panellists have to really believe that the decision is out there for them to meaningfully contribute to. If you don't do that, then the panellists will respond very badly.
So, Stephen, should we assume from the process then that the panellist would come to understand that the fix was in, if it was used improperly? The process would enable the panellists to understand that.
Yeah, and the beauty of ours was that we didn't have a 10-year financial plan. It was a blank sheet of paper. So we were saying, this is the first ever exercise. There's no incumbent position to defend. So there's no officers or councillors saying, we've always got it right, we've always done this best, how dare you change it? It was, we've never done this before, you've got a blank sheet. And that was, I think, part of the attraction. Because the first people we went to for a new policy area was the community.
I should stress as well that it's important that you have good facilitators. Someone asked a good question earlier about what's the difference between a focus group and a people's panel. It really goes to that deliberative element, so you really talk an issue through and work through the trade-offs, and you need good facilitators to be able to do that. If you don't get that bit right, it ends up just being like a focus group. What do you reckon? So there are examples of citizen juries that have not gone well because they've not been run well, basically.
So where are the facilitators from? Do you provide them?
Yeah, so in this case it was professional facilitators who ran it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, question here. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jennifer. I'm representing myself and my family. As you can see, I'm an international student back in 90 years ago, and I live in the City of Melbourne for 90 years. My family had settled here, and with my parents and all living here. We didn't have a problem, but recently, 3 years ago, we've been dragged into the mud by City of Melbourne, the municipal building surveyor. We had a dispute over a matter. Because of lack of resources, lack of contacts in the community, we don't know where to run, and we've been pushed to the court just recently into the magistrate court. And during one day context hearing, because the matter is a summary offence was accused by the municipal building surveyor of City of Melbourne. And my poor husband was so scared, and he pleaded guilty, but we actually didn't did anything wrong.
Take that as a comment.
And I have been searched a lot of places, and with the legal aid or with the law aid, and a lot of the community legal centre, but they don't.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, my question is where we can have our say, where we can find support.
Well, look, I think that's not quite a relevant question to tonight's conversation, but I'm sure there is someone here who can who can catch up with you and make sure you have that extended conversation when we conclude. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, when I saw today's
No,
topic,
I need to go on to questions for the panel for tonight's question, but I'm sure that I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm the Chief Executive of the City, and I'm happy to take your complaint after tonight's event.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Now, if we have I'll take this gentleman here, if I may, then the lady behind, just right there.
Thank you, Bill Bennett, Councillor, City of Whitehorse. Stephen, last week we were at the local government conference in Canberra, and the local government conference was promoted as the local government closest to the community. Your motion that just got, or the City of Melbourne motion that just got onto the papers to do with transparency and greater involvement of the public within council matters, failed to get up, the closely run ballot that failed to get up. Could you explain, in your mind, why that was?
Well, I wish it was close, Bill. My reading of the numbers was it got smashed. And it was put number 80 on the agenda out of 80. So, look, I put up an omnibus motion, and the more elements you put in there, the more opposition you get because someone's going to object to something. So we had everything from disclose your lease register to disclose your councillor expenses, pre-approve your interstate travel for councillors, disclose your most valuable properties, public questions every month, and audio of council meetings, and disclosing top executives' pay. So between all of those, I offended the majority of people, whether that was the CEOs or whether it was the councillors, the rurals saying we haven't got the resources, the people worried about their nutters asking too many questions and harassing them and pecking them to death. So that's why it got smashed. But it forced a conversation with the councillors, with 821 delegates, and I'll be following up with quite a few of them as to why they were so strongly opposed and maybe mentioning some of their names out there in the public.
Oh, okay, great, lovely.
Hello, my name is Rosemary Spadell, and the topic today really is about democracy. And what is democracy? More informed decision making. And I hear that the panel really value to get information to make an informed decision recommendation. I'm Swiss. And in Switzerland we have direct democracy, and we have really good debates on issues which really matter, and informed debates. So really, a citizen panel is fantastic, but how can we get a more informed debate about issues and policies and not slogans, because then we have democracy.
And you've got really good public transport too.
Because the people voted for it, that's why.
Yeah. Quick comments?
Yeah, look, that's probably for me. No, you're exactly right. And it is about, I mean, one of the problems in our system versus the Swiss, which is a 5-year term, we have a 3-year term. I mean, we have an election, we get a government, even if it's a re-elected government, they're there for 12 months, it's all sloganeering. They then get to operate for 12 months if they're lucky, and then they go into another 12 months of campaigning. So one of our problems, and City of Melbourne's better, you've got 4-year terms, you've got the one Lord Mayor. Every other council changes their mayor every 12 months. So you get an individual who's finally up to speed, and then they have to change. And then if they dare to run twice, I mean, oh, how terrible that the mayor wants to have 2 terms.
You've had your turn.
You've had your turn, it's somebody else's now. So we have this churn factor where we don't get enough time to actually engage, consult and do things. You've just done a 10-year plan. You know, we can't do a 10-year plan at Federal Parliament because, you know, you probably won't have 10 years going back to action on climate change. That's a long-term process. So I very much like Daniel Andrews' terminology about an oak tree, because a lot of the stuff, the infrastructure stuff, isn't going to be done in one term of government. So you've got to give it, but the public demand, so it's not just us, but the public also demand now, give it. And some people now, there's so much in your lives, you don't want to think about it. You want somebody else to make the decision for you, but we need to be better. We have the means to give you the information, we should be giving it to you.
I agree. Spin the bottle mayoral selection is a shocker. lived it for 3 years in Manningham, hate it. It just pollutes everything. It's a shocker. We need longer terms, fixed terms. Our media is too feral and too negative and too sensationalist and conflict focused. I saw the Swiss media is a lot more considered and responsible. And our party system, in my view, is too rigidly disciplined. A position and no one can deviate from that. The Americans, they'll let their people vote more flexibly, and I think that if we had more flexible voting, we wouldn't have this endless negativity of party block versus party block and irresolvable conflict. And then our upper houses are too powerful and no one's got the power to actually do anything because of crossbenchers. And I think that leads to more game playing and paralysis of decision making as well. So there's a few structural things, but I would like a more flexible party system and the calibre of politicians to be higher, I think, and then fixed terms and less feral media would be a few changes I'd make with a magic wand.
Quick comment from you, Nick.
Sure, I mean, I actually agree with most of the things that Stephen was saying. I guess I'd make a sort of a subtle point, though, that while I'm a very strong advocate for more democracy in our Australian political system, I do think you need to be careful about, absolute democracy, because you end up with sort of, you might find yourself with some outcomes which are not very good at all. Certainly, the thing
no outcomes.
Yeah, or no outcomes. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about citizen juries is that they're not looking to replace our political representatives. People like Anna and Stephen feel very important to the system, working through the minutiae and detail of legislation is really important. But finding ways forward on issues where there are trade-offs and is one area where these sort of forum can potentially provide a way forward.
Now I've got a question here. It may have to be the last. We'll see how we go. Lady here.
Melanie Ash. I just wanted to know what the process was after the People's Panel had voted and where do we go from here?
You produced a report which was submitted in April. Can't remember.
No, November, I think it was.
November,
It was
sorry.
November.
Yep.
We had a special committee meeting, so we gave it its own platform for a night, and the panellists got to present. Do you want to say anything more about?
Well, we got to present, and also we were challenged by the Lord Mayor and all the councillors on our recommendations, so we actually got to defend why we thought these recommendations are actually valid and should be accepted by the council. And then after that...
And then we had a council meeting where we voted to embed the panel recommendations in this document. So when you read this document, it's got, panel says point 1 this, our response is that. So it's very heavily forced in there, and the council has insisted on that. It probably come out a little bit later than we originally expected. We were thinking it would be part of our normal budget process, but it was a massively huge job. So it's only coming out publicly in the final stage of the budget, because we'll approve the final budget on June 30. So it hasn't gone through the draft budget public submissions element. So it's very much the officers' 10-year plan and the People's Panel's 10-year plan, and councillors will have had nothing to do with it. But every year we have to update it. And so the second year of the 10-year plan will have a slightly different process where it'll be out earlier and public submissions and those sort of things.
Thanks, James Johnson. Question for Anna, talking about democratic reforms and political parties, and someone alluded to the tightness of which particularly the Labor Party holds. Is there any potential for shaking these things up? But more specifically, the representation in the Senate, where the senators in the major parties are not directly elected by even the members of the parties, but only by the branches, I think with the exception of Queensland perhaps, the Labor Party. Is there any movement on this, which is a key kind of issue for how we increase the accountability of those representatives to the public?
About 60 seconds, Anna.
I think we've trialled some actual sort of actual voter engagement to pre-select candidates out there and in probably seats we're not going to win. But we've actually trialled it and we've seen it. Obviously the selection of the leader, Bill Shorten, there's some problems with it. We need to explore those. What they've done in the UK for years with electing their leader, they actually go out to all the members, and it's a pretty broad, robust process. So you won't know who the new leader of the Labor Party is in the UK for quite some time, because they'll actually give it some time and they're not paranoid about actually having a void. We're paranoid about having a void. And again, it goes back to our media here. But I'm not a Keatingite. I don't think the Senate's an unrepresentative swill. I'm a believer in a great Senate, in a robust Senate. The only time, I've been in Parliament 17 years, the only time I've seen really bad legislation is when Howard had control of both houses. And it wasn't just that I'm politically biased, even though I completely am. But there was no vetting. There was actually no discussion or vetting. Some of the best legislation that I've seen in the Parliament, and again I'm completely biased, came through a hung Parliament because you actually had to negotiate every step of the way. Not just that, you actually had to negotiate, and yeah, she was, but you had to negotiate everything through. So even though people go on about the crossbenchers at the moment, having to actually deal with Ricky Muir and having to deal with individuals forces you to actually explain why you think this is important, how you're going to negotiate it and how you're going to put it through. I believe in caucus solidarity. I signed up to that. But we have a robust process before we go into the Parliament. Trust me, we had a robust process this week. I lost. But, so you don't see all of that goes on. I spent a lot of my time in the South Pacific and dealing with parliaments in the South Pacific. They don't have parties. Now, you think that's good? No. Because then there's not cooperation. There's not like mind. There's individuals. So it's not the best system, as I said at the beginning, but it's the best out of the worst lot we've got. Can we do it better? Yes, we can. And could the Libs do it a lot better? Yeah, they can. Can the Greens do it better? Yeah, they can too. So it is also about people getting involved. That's one of my messages to everybody. I joined the Labor Party because I sound like the beauty queen, because I wanted to see global peace. I wanted to see change. You all want to do something, get involved. You know what I mean? You can all have a go at us, but you've also got to go on a citizens' jury, join a party, join your local community group. And I just think that's one of the things that we become apathetic about our great democracy. We have genuinely become completely apathetic about it. You want to whinge and complain, but you also, the whole of us, also need to be involved and do things better. But there'll actually be an interesting debate at National Conference. You can go along and observe. It's just at the Convention Centre in a couple of weeks.
And one of the great things about the panels is that...
I need to wrap up, everybody. This is your last comment, Stephen.
Absolutely. Is that about half of panellists go on to volunteer for something else. And they like to nominate for the panel because it's a finite commitment of time. It's 6 Saturdays and that's it. It's not Secretary of the Tennis Club for life. Not a life sentence. And we've got 42 civilly engaged residents now, and I'm hoping we might even get a councillor or two out of our diaspora. So I think there's win-win-wins all
He's
around.
already been putting the pressure on.
Closing comments. I need to wrap up.
A preference deal already.
Anna's given us
Anna's
given us a topic for another Melbourne conversation. Nick, a final comment?
Yeah, look, I just want to say a huge congratulations to Stephen Mayne, and who was your fellow councillor?
Rohan Leppert was the big driver.
And Stephen Mayne, who really supported this so strongly amongst the councillors, and also to the council officers, Desley and the others who did so many hours of work to make this happen. As a political scientist, I don't actually know what the answer is to fixing our democracy. I'm honest enough to say that, but I do know we need to start trying some new things, and good on you guys for having a go.
Well said, well said.
And the CFO.
Kirsty, a final comment.
Just to say that this was a fantastic process and we think we should do it. I think we should do it again. It was transparent, it was respectful, and it was a team effort between council, the facilitators and the panel. And I really applaud the council and Stephen for pushing this, and hopefully we can do it again.
And Linda, you have last word.
Yeah, I think that we should try to repeat this process as many times as possible at the local government level, and then let's see how much further we can take it to state and possibly to federal government as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panellists, the Honourable Anna Burke, Councillor Stephen Mayne, Linda McLeod, Nick Rees and Kirsty Carter.